This is my first Reddit post, and it's going to be heavy. It's going to contain physical and mental abuse, so trigger warning for everyone. I, 18 and female, met my ex, 22 and male, in February of 2020, but didn't end up dating him till closer to my 17th birthday because he still lived with his girlfriend. He had told me that they were just friends, and he didn't like her like that. And I couldn't find out till later that they were actually doing things together. And meeting him was the biggest mistake of my life. Everything started off great as every relationship goes. I sent pictures cause he was my boyfriend, and of course, I let him save them for later. Another big mistake. I noticed that they were still texting, and when I went through his phone, he was still saying he loved her and missed her. I was in deep pain and called him out on it. He apologized and said it would never happen again, and I told him to text her that we were dating. And he did. She was pissed. She stopped paying for the house and helping him with his car payments. And at that time, he had quit his Taco Bell job and refused to get a new one. He was an Uber driver because he said he needed to practice at League of Legends because he wanted to be a pro League streamer, as he said. So I worked my ass off and ended up losing my job because the manager didn't let me work without a doctor's note, so I got stuck working his job while he played games. Before I met him, I had $4,500 in my savings. He ended up using my card to pay for his phone bills, car payments, and the apartment, daily weed, fast food, new league accounts, and fucking CSGO knives. He kept losing his account on the game for using too much slurs. The worst was yet to happen. I found out that he was using my old tablet to excessively watch porn, set up dating accounts, and have different Instagram accounts. But on these accounts, he was pretending to be a woman. I called him out about this, and I told him I wanted to leave him. He started freaking out and jumping around and screaming and crying, saying he would change and I would trust him again. And I did end up falling for it. As time went on, things got worse, and I was scared to leave, and by the end of this, you will see why. He had shoved me into a wall, and he started getting in my face, screaming, "You stole my car key because you don't want me to work because you're jealous of other girls," which was stupid because he had thrown his car keys at me during a different argument. But one day, I went through the iPad and I found that he was actively not just sending, but selling my pictures from when I was 16 and doing the same with his other ex. I started to try to get my stuff together and put Gorilla Glue in the charging port just so I could get rid of the filth I just saw. When he found out that it no longer charged after he used my card to get us food, he was livid. He started screaming and getting in my face. I tried to go around him and grab my things, but when my back was turned, he pulled me down to the ground, wrestled me till he was able to put me in a chokehold. I was sobbing, and I just accepted that this would be the end. But before I blacked out, he let me go, and I started gasping for air and gagging from excessive coughing as he just stood there and laughed at me. I tried to crawl away from him when he grabbed my leg and started dragging me out of the apartment. I kicked to try to get him off of me, but it just made him pull me like a dog, playing tug of war. He eventually dragged me out, keeping my wallet, keys, and all of my valuables, so I sat crying, begging for my stuff just so I could go home. He came outside and pulled me down to the apartment stairs by my leg. Then he just left me there, completely bruised and with a lot of cuts. I did end up calling the police, and they did absolutely nothing. Fast forward a little bit, and he had to move because he had nowhere to stay or live after getting evicted from the apartment, and I had gotten a new job. One day, it was particularly cold, and I went to get a shirt out of my car, and there he was. He was just sitting in my car on his phone. I left my door unlocked usually because I worked in a good area. I called him a cheater and told him to leave, and then he got out of the car. It was starting to go around the back, so I jumped inside and tried to lock the car from the back seat. He ran over and pulled the door open and started trying to pull me out of the car. I started screaming and kicking at him. Thankfully, a customer saw this happening and called the police. They arrested him and told me to go home for the night. They ended up firing me for this. Unfortunately, he got bailed out, and while he was in jail, he had given out my phone number to other people there. He walked 4.5 hours to get to my house after he was released, and was looking around my backyard when my neighbor saw him and called my dad. My dad got to his truck with a gun and waited for him to come back. He eventually did, but ran off. He wasn't shot or anything though. He had been harassing me, saying he was going to show up to my graduation and ruin everything. And then he started making multiple fake accounts on Snapchat, Instagram, and TikTok, pretending to be me and his other exes. And as of today, January 1st, 2023, he still pretends to be high school girls on the internet and makes money off selling our pictures on fake accounts. I apologize if I have some errors. English is not my first language, and this will be a long post. Sorry. For context, I'm now 26, and I met my stalker at 14. So when I was 14, I decided to take ballroom dance classes. That was kind of normal for teenagers in my generation in my country. There you have to change partners each song, so every girl would dance with every boy. In my group that consisted mostly teens between 14 to 17, there was a really tall 21-year-old guy, Philip. We had a really nice chat the times we danced, but he seemed weird, and because I was young and naive, that's how I normally made friends. I told him where I lived when he asked me. So then the stalking began. At the time, I didn't realize that it was stalking. I just thought he had a lot of time, and it was annoying. Philip would ride on his bike from his home, he lived one town over, to my house and asked if I wanted to spend time outside and play with him. After doing that for a few times, I asked my parents to tell him that I was not home when he came over. Both my parents and I were very oblivious about his actions for a very long time. At one point, the stalking ended for a few weeks, and Philip also did not come to dance classes. At that time, I became part of a friend group of a boy I fancied. For some months, he had a girlfriend, but they split up soon, and then I became his girlfriend. Unfortunately, Philip was also friends with the best friend of my boyfriend, so he was also part of the group. They told me Philip was in a mental hospital. In the span of his stalking, Philip was in mental hospitals multiple times, and every time he was, I was glad because I finally had some peace. When I was 16, my family and I had to move because our landlady had thrown us out. She wanted to live on the property herself, so we moved one town over. We started living 2 streets apart from my stalker, and every time Philip was out of the hospital, he would be at my house. It was not as often, but still. On my father's birthday, he rang again, and because my family had guests, they told me to open the door, and there he was, looming over me like a dark, menacing shadow man. I told him to leave, and I tried to close the door, but he blocked it, so I was standing there, afraid, begging him to leave. One time, I even ran inside to get my dad to send him away, but my dad said, "He's your friend, so it's your problem." So I went back to the door and begged and pleaded that Philip just please leave. At one point, he was sitting in my doorway. After almost 2 hours, he finally left. At that point, it was obvious for me. Finally, I realized what type of behavior it was, that he was a stalker, and he was fixated on me. The next day, I sat down with my parents and I told them that I was afraid of Philip, and my dad apologized to me for putting me in that situation, not helping me. The next time Philip came to my house, my dad was there and told him that I do not want any contact with him anymore, so he left. After a few more incidents like that, he stopped showing up at my door, and I thought I got rid of my stalker. But every time I started to live happily and started to forget my fear of him, a letter or email or a gift would show up and would send me right back into my fears. At 20, I was out of school, and past the year I had to wait to start my job. I worked at a grade school and would volunteer after school for a care club for grade schoolers. After a month or 2, my mom woke me up in the morning and told me to get dressed because she had to call the cops. Apparently, Philip was again every morning at our door and asked for me, and my parents didn't tell me so I wouldn't get scared again. Finally, after the cops told Philip 3 times to leave and he ignored them, they arrested him, and he screamed my name, and that he was very mad at me and the cops that was hurting him. My parents and I were standing in the kitchen listening. The situation was so absurd, and so much for me to start laughing hysterically. We filed a report at the police station for stalking and trespassing, but the officers said they couldn't do anything because he hadn't hurt me physically. We tried to get a restraining order, but it didn't go through. A week later, Phil had sneaked into our garden and, like in a movie, he threw rocks at my window. Side note, but throwing rocks at a girl's window is not romantic, it's just creepy. Idiot me opened the window, but did not see anything until it clicked and I ran downstairs and told my dad that my stalker was in the garden. Philip then escaped. A week after that, I was in the kitchen cooking when Philip rang the doorbell again, and because we have no way of seeing who it is at the door, I opened it. And there he was, again telling me that he missed me and saying that he peeked through the blinds of the windows in the living room over the past few weeks to see if I was there. My parents were not home. If they had been, I would have ran. But like this, I had to swallow my fear and stand in the doorway listening to Philip talk until my boyfriend, a different one, came. I sent him an SOS text and he was on his way. After my boyfriend arrived, he told Philip to leave, and he did leave. Philip mentioned in passing that he now also has a girlfriend. After that, I did not see Philip again for a long time. A friend told me that he was taken in by the men in white coats because he had believed that his mom was possessed by the devil. I was glad. It wasn't until 2 years later when I got a letter from court. I was going to be a witness. I was going to testify of a case of assault from Philip. Apparently, after coming out of the mental hospital, he had a big fight with his girlfriend. He started hitting her, and she got so scared that she played dead. Philip called an ambulance, and the police finally had something against him. After the hearing, he was admitted again to a mental hospital, and I finally got a restraining order, and he was ordered to stay at least 30 meters away from me or my property. I was so glad. The restraining order also implied that if he broke any of the requirements, he would go to jail. So it was all over. 2 years ago, I also moved out of my parents' house. I'm posting this only now because I believe I'm seeing him again, but it can't be. He doesn't know where I live, and he also hasn't shown up at my parents' house, but I believe I've seen him when I leave the house. I just need some kind of reassurance that it's not him again and that I'm safe at my home. Update. So I installed a camera, and my neighbors also told me that there's a man that works around here that kind of looks like him. So for now, I think I'm safe. I believe I saw that person and not Philip. Thanks so much for all of your advice. I'm very grateful. After binging about 12 hours straight of YouTube readings of this subreddit, my mind has been in a dark place, though I can't entirely blame it. My mind goes here often. This happened 3 years ago, but requires some background. My best friend and I grew up in a sleepy wannabe Jersey Central Florida town, and we were the outcasts. We had met in 6th grade when I overheard her talking to another classmate about Bionicles, my 11-year-old self's passion. We became fast friends, and soon we were inseparable. Soon began a gauntlet of sleepovers, birthday parties, and family gatherings. We were practically siblings. She was the first person I'd come out to as bisexual, and she was the first person she told me about being trans. Her home life was terrible, though. I can't say mine was much better. We often had a habit of taking refuge at each other's houses. Like I said, we became like siblings. Her dad was an alcoholic, strict and prone to physical discipline. Her sister was a stuck-up girl who gravitated towards the hicks and jocks when we entered high school. And her mother was a crazy vegan hippie love child held over from the 80s. When I was 23, herself 22 at the time, we had another long night of sleeping over in order to escape yet another fight with her mother. She had recently lost her job at Walmart, and I was going into my first shift at Taco Bell the next day. On the drive home the next morning, she explicitly told me that since she now had her own vehicle, she would be applying at a pizza place that would be in need of a driver. I was proud. It was the first time she hunted for a job on her own, as I'd usually be the one to coax her to apply somewhere I was working. Not that she ever lasted very long. My first training day goes by quite well. My coworkers are friendly and try to get me to talk more. My manager likes to playfully embarrass me, a fat white guy, by trying to get me to talk hood to the other workers. Being a training day, it wasn't a very long shift, but I had been up early in anticipation from this being my first day on a job in months. I got home around noon, informed some of my internet friends that my first day went well, and around 5 p.m. I started to go to bed, drained from a good day. As I am preparing to lay in my bed, I get a stem of messages, her lamenting another fight with her mother and asking if she could come over. Now I had started to grow a bit weary of the fights on their end. I'd began to repair my relationship with my family, and a few friends had given her advice many times on how to better approach things. In my infinite wisdom and eagerness to sleep, I left the message unread and drifted into slumber. Around 8 p.m., I was awakened by her bursting into my room in a panic. Having just been ripped from a dream, I'm groggy and disoriented. I drag myself to the bathroom to relieve my bladder and come back to the room to find her rocking back and forth in my bed. It's at this time I notice she's covered in blood, so I ask her what happened. She informs me that she just saw someone murder her mother with a knife. My mind goes blank. In the deepest parts of my mind, alarm bells start ringing. Isn't the rocking back and forth a little over dramatic? Why didn't she just call the police? But this is my best friend. I've known her for over a decade, and we were the only two people in the world who we could count on. I suppress it, and I go inform my sister and stepfather. My mother had passed away the year prior, and it was roughly a month to the anniversary of her death. We were all in a dark place, antisocial as always. It was the only way we knew how to handle emotional issues. When I inform my family, they immediately go to the same place as I had, though they are far more vocal about it. I offer excuses that I knew to myself were flimsy and return to the room, phone in hand. I convince her to call the police, and I can hear her explain the details over the phone. A man in a black ski mask. When the cops arrive, she swears up and down that it's most likely her father. I send cars over to check the crime scene and take her in for a statement. I ride with her in the back of a cop car over to the sheriff's office. It gets to be around 2 a.m. Her sister was brought in, as well as her father. I have work the next morning and request to be taken home by a police officer. It takes me a while to go to sleep that morning. The next day, at work, I'm quiet until my manager asks me what happened. I inform him, but decided to work the rest of my training shift. When I get home, my sister informs me she had confessed. Her mother had threatened to kick her out the house for not being able to find a job, and in a rage, she had taken a kitchen knife and stabbed her repeatedly. My mind froze like a bad computer, and I turned to face the monitor. I was in a Discord call at the time, and all I could weakly say is, my best friend confessed to murdering her mother before hanging up and laying on my bed. Her last trial was the 7th of this month. I don't know the results, though my grandmother tells me she took a plea deal for life in prison rather than the death penalty. Part of me wants to contest that, to demand that they take the death penalty for ridding the earth of such a beautiful and caring person. A larger part of me is just glad that she's being punished. Natalie, you are my best friend, my sister, my platonic soulmate, but please, let's never meet again.